welcome to the next episode of Learning at Meridian. This is our podcast focused on breaking down some of the basics of the blockchain technology world. And from time to time, as we're going to do today, touching on a news story that's caught a lot of people's attention, but from a sort of, let's lay out the full picture of what's going on. I'm Aren Rendell. I run the Meridian Update, TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube channel. And I'm here with Walter. You want to give your intro?
Yeah, I'm Walter Phillips of Meridian Research. I do lots of things. This is one of them. Nice.
Okay. So Google does a bunch of quantum stuff.
Yes.
Right. Or supposedly.
Yeah.
They have something called Willow.
Yeah.
Who knows? So they just published their research team, along with some guy at the Ethereum Foundation, plus a few others.
Yeah,
just published this 57-page report, white paper, research paper, whatever you want to call it, that basically says, we think Bitcoin and Ethereum are more at risk from quantum than we previously thought. Or maybe the correct way to describe it, or more correct way to describe it would be, we have proved that in theory, you could break Bitcoin or Ethereum more quickly, more easily, using quantum methods than we previously had confirmed.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to talk about that.
Yeah.
What was your initial reaction?
Kind of just shrugged my shoulders.
You're a shrugger.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of...
You're not scared.
Not really. I think there's a lot of talk in general about quantum and what it can do to cryptocurrency specifically. But if anything you can do to cryptocurrency, you can do to cryptography in general. So I think we should step back and be like, this is all the cryptography that we need to be fixing overall on the internet. So that my first reaction was a shoulder shrug, because the people who were saying this are the same people who have been saying this every 6 months, kind of like, oh my gosh, quantum's going to break everything. The Bitcoin price is down because of it, blah, blah, blah. I then looked into the paper, and the paper is actually interesting. Very reputable people, seems very reasonable. There was a very interesting method that they used to prove that the paper was correct, or that the thing that they said was true. They used a zero knowledge proof. They didn't actually reveal the method that they used to reduce the time to break the cryptography, but they used a zero knowledge proof to prove that they could do this in theory, which is like exciting. It's like fun.
Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah. And it makes sense.
They nerd sniped you. You, the chief shoulder shrugger,
chief of
when it
ZKP.
comes to quantum stuff.
Yeah.
They actually got you interested in the paper.
Yeah.
Not because of the paper's contents.
I was like, oh, it's cool they did a ZKP. Yeah. What they to prove this.
So we'll get into that. So, okay. Here's what I think are some good goals of the day. You already covered one of the things. But I want to talk a bit more about that, which is this. I think like the headline to me was, sure, but remember that this is about cryptography. Mm-hmm. The reason cryptography is so important or whatever to Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana, et cetera, is that it's kind of the whole thing.
Yeah.
But there's obviously a broader implication here.
Yeah.
So I want to break that down a bit for people. I think that's the headline takeaway from a podcast like this versus just reading the headline, or seeing, my TikTok post about it a few days ago. Second thing I want to talk about is you mentioned this, like people have been saying this. This is nothing new. I remember the first time I saw a paper of this variety was probably late 2010s, maybe.
Yeah.
And it was like, whoa, that actually is a really good point. This is scary. And then I thought about it more, so I want to think about it together on the mic for people to kind of understand how people who, have been aware of this for a decade are thinking about it. The way you feel differently when it's like, this is the first time hearing of this versus like, you're familiar. And then the third thing is I want to kind of wrap with okay, but there are real implications for, you take an Ethereum, a Solana, a Bitcoin. There are real implications for each of those. They're kind of different.
Yeah, they're very different actually.
So I think that's interesting. How does that sound?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay. So let's let's kind of kick things off. You're reading this paper. Your initial reaction is like, I've seen this before. Tell me more about that.
Yeah. So I guess I'll just say like what it means, like why quantum computers matter for cryptography at all. Basically right now, the way cryptography works is that you're making a really hard problem to solve. And in theory, these problems that you need to solve to like break cryptography typically will take you longer than the universe will exist to break, more than likely. And that's the strength that like a lot of the internet is built on. It's this idea that we can create some really strange, hard problem that you have to solve to break this encryption. And the only way you'd ever break this encryption is if you had more energy than exists in the universe, or if you had more time than will exist in the universe, essentially. So that's like kind of the first thing. Quantum computers, however, kind of sidestep this. Because of how quantum computers work, they are able to break these things faster. There's something called Shor's algorithm. Look into it. That's like kind of the basis of like how quantum computers can break cryptography very quickly. So in theory, we have quantum computers that can break cryptography. We've been working on quantum computers for a while. I'm sure like many of us have seen the YouTube video of like, like the massive gold thing with like maybe it's just me. Never mind.
I haven't seen this.
Yeah. It's like
this is the first time
it has
hearing
like
of this.
50 million views. So I feel like some people
It was
are
a
watching
wonderful
this.
YouTube video.
Yeah. Might have seen it. So quantum computers have been around for a while. And one thing people have always said is that quantum computers can break cryptography. I read this paper. I know this already. One of my big interests, like 2020, 2021, was post-quantum cryptography.
Mm-hmm.
NIST had...
And there's this acronym people talk about, PQC.
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about. Post-quantum cryptography.
Yeah.
Okay.
NIST had a competition. NIST is like a government organization to create some forms of post-quantum cryptography. It went on for a couple of years. I was kind of following it. I was curious. I was interested. And like they're winners now. And there's like these things are going out into production in the world. So now we have post-quantum methods. To be clear, we can have cryptography that is quantum proof. So do not fear. That said, many of the things that we use today aren't quantum proof, including blockchains. Because of that, people are always like, blockchains are going to get broken. All your Bitcoin's going to get stolen. All your ETH is going to get stolen. All your Solana's going to get stolen. Everything's going to go horribly one day when someone breaks this stuff. In my mind, for the longest time, I've always been like, this is like a 2030 to 2045 concern, realistically. But this paper has proved that it might be earlier than that. It might be sooner. It might still be 2030. No one really knows like how these things will develop. These things are very nonlinear. There might be a breakthrough. There might not be a breakthrough. You might get the compute, or like you might get the funding or not the funding. The government might change, and like what the grants look like for these things will change. And so exactly when we'll have these computers available will change. That said, the people who will be able to do this initially are going to be nation states or massive companies. So it's not going to be like random Joe Schmo is going to be able to like hack everything everywhere in the world because they have like a quantum computer. No, that's not what's going to happen. That said, it being 20 times faster than before is pretty interesting. It's like a pretty compelling reason as a forcing function for these different blockchains, and also just the internet in general to like speed up to become quantum proof, essentially. So I think that was kind of my takeaway from the paper. It's like, oh, this is more urgent than we thought. People are already working on this, but pour more resources into this. These things are definitely things you can solve. I think on the non-cryptocurrency side, just the regular internet, your big issue is, so a lot of what you're doing on the internet right now is actually quantum proof cryptography already. So big organizations like Google, Amazon with like AWS, like all these things, like these, more short tail, like the bigger organizations are already moving towards having post-quantum crypto standards in some verticals. It's more the long tail enterprises that you kind of have to worry about, like actually adopting these things quickly enough. So this is already happening. From a cryptocurrency perspective, crypto works on consensus. To change the protocol, you have to come to some agreement. This is the most true of Bitcoin. There's going to have to be some community consensus. This is the least true of Solana, of the big three. The Solana Foundation, Solana Lab is going to be like, yo, validators, here's a new thing, update it, pretty much. They're going to go in a Discord server and say, change this right now, and people will change it because they're incentivized to. Ethereum somewhere in the middle, where the Ethereum Foundation has a plan and they like have like intentions to roll this out quickly. One of the people who did this research, actually, Justin Drake, was a part of the Ethereum Foundation. I think he left. Maybe he left, or maybe he's the one who stayed. A bunch of the researchers left recently, and I don't remember if he's one who left or stayed. But he's very close to these people. Like, he worked with them for a long time. if he left. And so this is like, these people are all in contact. This is like known. I'm sure Vitalik got a heads up before the paper dropped. He knew this was happening. So that's kind of my takeaway from the paper. If I like after reading it, like I'm not reading it, skimming through. I didn't read all 57 pages. I know.
That's so rude.
It's horrible.
Did you at least have your agent read all 57?
I did give it to an agent to read all 57.
How do you think it did? Do you think it enjoyed reading it?
I think he had a great time. It said thinking a bunch, and then gave me a summary.
That's pretty good. Okay, and I've been furiously trying to get a good little summary about the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and something I was especially curious about. What I was vigorously trying to get my agent to do was to give us a little summary on their funding picture, because I think NIST is a very interesting organization. Give me a few more turns.
Yeah.
But I'm going to ask you a couple questions here about this. So I think you did a good job explaining the paper. This concept of like, this wasn't like Google announcing that they have a quantum computer or know the pathway to get to a quantum computer that's powerful enough to break Bitcoin, Ethereum, et cetera. It was very different. It was like, in theory, and also here's where we are, right? So that was a good framing. I think it's important to note that people expect this is not the lower bound. They just haven't proved it yet. So people think it can get even easier.
It could get easier potentially, yeah.
So there is this like the gap is closing, right? I think there, maybe 10 years ago you would have said the gap is 20 or 30 years. Now you might say it looks like 10.
Yeah.
And in a year or two we might say, it looks more like 3.
Could be like 3, 5.
So
yeah.
it's it's not. I'm not selling my Bitcoin right now.
Yeah.
But okay.
I don't think you should. I think the way I think about this, like from a global perspective, if you had a skeleton key that could crack into anything, break into anything, could do anything, are you breaking Bitcoin first? Is that like really the first thing you'd ever do?
That's actually an interesting question. Well, but why not?
Because
why not just break it all?
Sure, break it all. But then if you break it all, then Bitcoin is at least.
Yeah. No, it's a good point. It's a good
if
point.
you hit the apocalypse button.
I want you to talk to people a little more about the zero knowledge proof element of this. What I thought was interesting, one, there's some reason they did it this way.
Yeah, for sure.
That I suspect is more marketing than substance.
I think it is substance too.
Okay,
right.
So I want to hear you talk about that. But I think probably first it would be helpful for you to just like describe zero knowledge proofs, the landscape of that a little bit more, where those are relevant in the world. And then, kind of like this is the first time, talk about how this is the first time someone's done that. So I'll turn to you while I get us more info on NIST.
Yeah. So zero knowledge proofs, or as I'll refer to them, ZKPs, are a subset of cryptographic research, which do something that's basically magic, feels very much like magic, which is that you can prove something about something without revealing any information about it. So I can tell you what age you are without ever seeing your ID with one of these zero knowledge proofs. I won't get into the ins and outs of how this works specifically from a cryptographic perspective. There's a really good number file video about this where they explain kind of how this happens. If you're interested, you can go watch it. It's actually a very, very good explanation. But basically, ZKPs are this magic box that allow you to prove some piece of information without revealing anything about the actual underlying thing you're proving the information about. So I could tell you Aren's age without ever seeing his ID in theory. I could create some box that's a zero knowledge proof box. I could do this. I could prove where he's from. I could prove where I'm from. I could do these types of things using a zero knowledge proof. There's some provenance, if he could have a fake ID, but then you have to do a ZKP to see if the ID is fake or not. There's definitely some practical effort that you have to put in to make these things actually work in the wild, which is why they're not everywhere, but they're real and they work. This being a case of them working. So what they did is that so I think the 20x improvement that they had is that they came up with a new methodology. They basically came up with a new algorithm or new method of using quantum computers to break elliptic curve cryptography, which is all the cryptography basically. On these things, you can think of all of it's elliptic curve cryptography. They came up with a new methodology. This methodology is not known, right? It's known to the people who did the research. Maybe some people Google somewhere. And if it's hacked into Google, they probably know too, but hopefully no one has. which is why I think they did the zero knowledge proof thing. It's that this is information only they have. Someone else can figure this out, but let them go through the effort of figuring it out, as opposed to just giving it to them for free. And then once this becomes possible, whoever it is who might have a quantum computer that might be a threat of some kind would be able to break things much faster. And I think it makes sense because these people are like really, truly subject matter experts. These are like some of the best people in the world at this thing.
Yeah.
And so it's going to be hard to recreate this very easily. It's not impossible. It's definitely going to happen at some point. Yeah. But the lead that you've given, like, you know, yourself by not revealing the information makes it worth using a zero knowledge proof to prove that they can do this thing without revealing what the methodology was to do it.
Totally. Understood. Yeah, very interesting. And I think I read that this was maybe kind of like a bit of a handshake deal with some government agencies. I don't know if it was specifically American.
That seems reasonable.
They're kind of like, hey, maybe if you're going to do this, like, is there a way for you to like not tell everyone how? Because that might be good. We're entering an interesting technological period of time. Okay, this is all good. I think you've done a great job introducing, you know, what the paper actually said, why they, you know, what these things mean, how they did it, all the kind of basic news stuff. I want to move into my kind of list of 3. So this doesn't just apply to crypto. Talk about that.
Not just apply to crypto.
Or maybe it almost definitionally only applies to crypto, as in cryptography.
It only.
But not, okay.
Not cryptocurrency.
Take it away.
Because you can break basically all the cryptography that exists on the internet right now, everything that's out there in the world right now. Well, not, I guess, let me say, middle of last year, middle of 2025, most things were not post-quantum crypto.
Right.
Things are transitioning now. End of 2025, AWS is like fully transitioned for like certain verticals, et cetera. Google as well.
Verticals. Okay.
Yeah. Like, but the other thing is that
Google in the paper, one of the things was Google said we're targeting 2029.
Yeah, to be
fully PQC.
Yeah, but I think a part of it is that there's different parts of the internet stack that are post quantum, like use cryptography. So there's like signing. There's actually like cryptography hiding things. So I think the signing layer for AWS and for Google is now post quantum crypto, and so like the different key exchanges that are happening, like whenever you're like setting up a connection, those are post quantum crypto.
Wow.
But other parts aren't, and that's in part because you have to have like these different institutions like come with standards and like agree to like which algorithm are we going to use, because there's multiple different algorithms you could use, et cetera, before you as an entity can go implement this as a part of the internet.
And I mean, that's like, I think there's something weirdly heartening in this story, which is like, I remember the first time I heard about quantum, I thought about quantum computing in the context of breaking cryptography as we knew it, right? I was like, oh, that actually sounds pretty bad. Yeah. And the thing people at the time said was like, well, in theory, we should be able to identify cryptographic methods that are resistant to quantum computing. But we'll actually have to roll them out. That was always like the hard part as people described it to me. Yeah. And so I was like, oh, I don't know. We can't like build bridges or whatever. We can't build subway lines. You know, like there's this kind of like general sense that, you know, hard things aren't possible anymore. Yeah. Truly hard things aren't possible anymore because, you know, we can't get the handshakes to happen. Everyone's, you know, going their own ways. But maybe not. Like, hey, like things are kind of actually moving. Like the thing of like, we have to do it over the next 10 years. We can't not do it. It's happening. Yeah.
That's what I'm like. No one's gonna let the entire world break.
But
I think in this specific case. So like I was saying earlier, I think for the government and for massive entities like the Googles and Amazons of the world, they will get it done. It's the long tail random enterprise that you have to worry about. Luckily for us, most things are running on AWS, right? A lot of the things are running on AWS and GCP. Yeah. So you will get that. You just instantly get like, you know, post quantum crypto.
But right, this has always been true because even now, like I think there are a lot of smaller operations that are not even operating at like a 2015 standard. Yeah. Right. Like using probably like there's probably a company out there. There's definitely a company out there that like wrote its own cryptographic methods. Yeah. And they're like obviously horrible, you know, like this is just how the world works. And they just haven't transitioned because whatever. Yeah. But this is really like you kind of want the base 80-90% to be really good.
Yeah. Yes.
Because everything else would be like if those aren't, you have huge problems like catastrophic consequences.
Really bad.
So I don't know. it's normal.
I think it'll be okay. I think it'll be fine. Except in this case, it's like before it was, they'd have to like prod and like probe like this like the infrastructure to figure out where to go. Now they can just like walk in. It's just like the door is open. So it's a little bit less like the barrier is like non-existent now.
Sure.
If they don't fix this, I think another interesting thing about this global like what all this looks like. I think there's going to be up until the point when nations became post-quantum crypto proof, like from a military perspective and from an intelligence perspective.
They already are.
Some of them are. Like the US is like working, like there's no way they aren't in some cases, because if you aren't, the information's free, right? Yeah. Like I'm China, I'm any other country. I just collect the data and wait until I have a computer that can decrypt it, and I just get it. Yeah,
I see.
Like the F-22, it's like public information if it's not post-quantum crypto.
Right.
Yeah, given enough time.
Yeah, I see.
Oh, so
there's actually an issue that's like people are collecting data now.
Yeah, like I say this often. This is a joke. The NSA is collecting all the data. They're decrypting all of it when they can. It's all going to get decrypted. Sure. And they're going to shove it into the Palantir machine.
Yeah. No, this is a good point. This is a good point that I've underappreciated, which is like actually you kind of want to move way faster than you think.
Yeah.
Because if you think about like the F-22, F-35 is a good example where like, it takes 10 to 20 years often now it seems for the US to, move from one generation of fighter jet to the next. So if the files are sitting there, they were made in year one and now we're 15 years later, you still kind of don't want quantum computers to happen in that window because you get this opportunity for someone to have the data that you don't want them to have, right?
Yeah.
So there's just like 10 to 15 year lag maybe on a lot of files. Not everything, not all information exchange, but a lot of stuff is like you'd really prefer sooner rather than later. Yeah, that makes sense. That's
even like random like all the correspondence between like the president and the CIA is going to be public up until a certain point when we were like post-quantum proof. And it's like, that's just going to be true.
In the same way. Yeah. Totally.
And it'll be true for everyone in the world, like us included. Like, nothing's actually private probably.
Yeah, totally.
But that's kind of already true, so it's fine.
Rats.
Yeah.
This is actually part of why I have this theory for people. I'm basically like, stop trying to be private. It's futile. You got to just go on a podcast. Say everything you think. Everything you do.
The CIA's favorite agent, by the way.
Huh?
I said the CIA's favorite agent, by the way.
No, I just
this guy. No.
It's futile. Anyway, okay, this is a good point. So I think hopefully this section has kind of like helped people not just hear the words, but also like you follow the sequence of what we just talked about. It's like we really just aren't even talking about Bitcoin.
Yeah.
We think this paper is much more about other things.
Yeah.
Right. Everything else, like Bitcoin is so unimportant.
Yeah.
Right. Like who cares? Solana, Ethereum. Yeah, whatever. Everything else is much more important. And any innovations in like how quantum computers can break cryptography apply to other things just as much, if not more.
Yeah.
The one point the paper made that I basically just wholly disagree with, they were basically like, we know people are going to say this, that, this applies to other things. But other things can just update quickly. I was like, come on. Like, first of all, no. Second of all, yeah, I guess it's true that Ethereum takes a couple years for them to.
But there hasn't been a thing where it's like the entire thing breaks.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's like they'd probably figure it out.
I feel like you probably buck up. You figure it out.
I agree. So it's like a little silly. The point maybe stands a bit more for Bitcoin, which is like
Bitcoin. I think it stands a bit more for
there's
the foundation.
Who does that?
Yeah, it's a lot of it is truly community consensus. I think when we get into the details, I will speak about why Bitcoin's conversion is going to be probably the hardest.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. So we'll get there, but yeah, I want to wrap this section. I'm going to do a little segue by reading our update on the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which I think is one of those like really important things you've never heard of. It's kind of like, HTTP, HTTPS. These are managed by this, organization where unless you for some reason decided you were going to read the Wikipedia page to like figure out how it works, you don't realize like there's actually just a collection of people who do the thing.
Yeah.
Or maybe there's a collection of people who do the thing. You just haven't actually, you don't know who it is.
No
or
name, no face.
How it's organized or whatever.
Yeah.
So NIST, and the reason they're relevant in this context, as you brought up, is they're the ones who, well, actually, it's gonna be in the summary. Oh, my agent is so good.
It's too easy.
125-year-old non-regulatory agency in the Department of Commerce, which I love that they're in the Department of Commerce. I think that's very interesting, as opposed to like defense or, it could be a number of places. No. Not on this. Not in my presence. I think that's just. They set the measurements, standards, and technical benchmarks underpinning much of modern life. Maintains the country's most accurate atomic clocks. Pretty cool. Keeps GPS, financial markets, internet synchronized. They developed the cybersecurity framework that most organizations worldwide use to manage cyber risk. So it goes beyond the U.S., right? They created the encryption standards that protect virtually all online communications right now. And they recently finalized post-quantum cryptography, PQC standards designed to secure data against future quantum computers. Really important organization. So this is interesting. I also asked about the funding trajectory of NIST because I was curious. I haven't been checking in. NIST's budget hovered around $1 billion through the 2010s, then got a major expansion through the 2022 CHIPS and Science Act, which tasked it with overseeing $11 billion in semiconductor R&D, standing up an AI safety institute, and hiring hundreds of new staff in quantum and advanced manufacturing. The Trump administration has moved to reverse much of that expansion, proposing to cut the budget roughly in half, firing or planning to fire up to 500 employees, renaming the AI Safety Institute to drop safety from its mission, and dismantling the manufacturing extension partnership that supported small manufacturers in all 50 states since 1988. Didn't know about that one. Congress has mostly rejected the proposed budget cuts on a bipartisan basis. The administration has been able to reshape the agency through workforce reductions and contract cancellations that don't require legislative approval.
Doge.
So this is interesting. Yeah, I think that a little bit of it. This is interesting. I think I'm one of those people who's like, when you look at the aggregate budgets, people always want to cut stuff, but when you like tell them exactly the thing that's getting cut, they're usually like, I don't know, I kind of like PBS or whatever, Yeah. I feel this maybe the most strongly about NIST. I'm kind of like, this is just not the kind of thing that happens without something like NIST.
Yeah.
And I think we're lucky because, there are probably versions of this that are not done well in a government landscape. NIST has, I think, kind of proven over and over again, whatever they're doing right. Yeah. So I'm very happy to have them have a bigger budget. So that's kind of interesting. They're a battleground, just as Google is announcing, like, oh, be scared of quantum. Okay. Fun segue. So I now want to move into my second question. What was my second question? I'm forgetting it. Third thing was the actual impact on the crypto currencies, walking through that.
Yeah. You never said it to me, so
No, I did. I said it out loud. The second part of the episode that I was trying to go for. I got so distracted by NIST.
Okay, so the first thing that we did is that we went over like
this applies to everything.
Yeah.
Second, was it this isn't that big of a deal? Oh yeah, that was it. You were saying it's not that big of a deal.
Yeah.
For the blockchain networks.
Yeah.
I want you to explain that to me. Like why this seems like a big deal for the blockchain networks.
Yeah. It's okay. It's not that big of a deal for Ethereum and Solana. For Bitcoin, I think it could be a problem. These things called scripts on Bitcoin, which might pose a big problem. Satoshi's wallet not getting basically if they don't transition effectively or like in a way that's like truly meaningful, there's a bunch of Bitcoin just laying around and someone could get access to it and then it could like throw the whole like value of the currency out of whack and throw the whole network out of whack potentially. That said, I'll be honest, I think most of the people who are involved in these spaces, or a lot of them, are very incentivized by money.
Yeah.
And they don't want to lose their money.
All of it. Yeah.
So they're going
to... So actually, I realized I poorly formatted this section on the second go around. It's not a big deal in the sense that this paper is part of a long series of papers kind of saying some version of the same thing. And for you, this is already known information.
Yeah.
So like if you're Bitcoin, if you're Ethereum, you're Solana, you already know about this.
You already know you need to be doing this.
So kind of give me that landscape. Like talk to me. I think you said every 6 months you see a paper like this.
Yeah. No, I don't see a paper like this. I see a fuss about this from someone who really doesn't understand how these things work, but he's a thought leader.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the 20x reduction.
No podcasters.
Huh?
Podcasters would never.
Oh, podcasters only say things that are true.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. Come on, don't be silly. Yeah, I think for people who are in these spaces and are thinking, like, know that these like are things that are being thought about, this isn't really a concern. So much so that Solana could just like drop a working version of a node that was post-quantum crypto proof the day after.
Sure.
Wasn't optimized, of course. Like, it's not as fast as a regular Solana node, but they were like, yeah, like this is a thing we're like working on actively. This is a thing I've like seen the Ethereum Foundation talk about. This is a thing I've seen the Solana Foundation talk about since last year, before that even. Both of them in their big manifestos that they had recently, they like both, like, well, especially Ethereum, they spoke about it. For Bitcoin, I think it's definitely more of a battleground because there's no one's in charge of Bitcoin, kind of. So it's definitely more concerning. But again, I'll say, I think these people know about this. This is known. So it's not
and
really
and like this paper, I think it's kind of important to like emphasize that this paper is describing something that we are basically certain. There's always a chance, but like we are certain no one can actually execute today.
Yeah. No one can execute this.
No one's even close to being able to execute today. Yeah. One reason I think people particularly jumped a little bit at this paper was it was like, it's coming from Google, which is in theory the leader in quantum computing. We don't really know. Yeah. But some people think that.
Yeah.
But they're not even like what they described as a method that is so far away from what they're, it doesn't even work. Quantum computer.
And the thing is, they could have a breakthrough tomorrow that allows them to do this. And I still don't think they'd attack Bitcoin.
Sure.
And also a bunch of other things on the internet would also
Google
need to be.
Wouldn't,
Google wouldn't, yeah. But like, it's gonna be Google, the U.S. government, Amazon,
Chinese government, Iranian government. Do you think they're in the game?
Doubt.
Probably tough.
Yeah, probably tough to work on right now.
Israeli government?
Doubt.
Really?
Doubt.
Wow.
On quantum computing, I doubt. Cybersecurity.
To be clear, we've moved into deep opinion territory. Now we're guessing. We have no idea. You never know.
I think they're preoccupied with other things.
But yeah, I think that's actually a good point. Is like the quantum computing landscape is much smaller right now than you'd think.
Yeah.
I liken it to like nuclear arms development in the maybe like 40s, 50s, 60s.
It's like AI in the 90s.
Sure.
Yeah.
Very small number of people because it's just still widely perceived to be beyond.
Yeah, there's a constraint.
The basic, we can kind of work on this easily. So it's not worth it. We want to focus. It's like if you're a would-be bad actor, you're way more interested in what you can do with bio weapons and nuclear weapons and AI.
Yeah.
Because you're like, even bad actors are constrained in their investment decisions, right?
Yeah.
In fact, actually, especially bad actors are constrained in their investment decisions. So funny to think about it this way, but like quantum is just not. It's no chance. Yeah.
And like also, I think just from a infrastructure perspective, like let's say you have an attention is all you need level, like stepwise improvement in what this looks like. You're still going to need a massive amount of compute probably and infrastructure. So it's not going to be like some random kid in their basement who will like do this. Maybe the random kid in their basement will like come up with some algorithm that will make this all much faster, way simpler. Yeah. But they aren't going to be able to be like, okay, and now I hack everything.
There really is some time.
Yeah.
Basically. Yeah. I think that's the headline is like, it's one of the problems that actually least keeps me up at night. There are so many other things where I'm like, man, I don't know, bioweapons, like people really could just figure it out randomly. You know, like I think it's gotten to the point where it's like some kid, you know, nuclear stuff.
Like climate change keeps me up more at night.
Okay.
Even though climate change is like,
and you know, the Trump administration, that's part of the reason they're not very happy with NIST, because they think it's pushing the climate agenda.
Yeah.
So you're going to get your funding for next year from the Trump administration also might get cut. Walter was taking in $1 billion a year from
yeah. Doge cut it actually.
Yeah. Tough. It was a tough moment for you. Okay. So yeah, I think it's really important. There's so many headlines, and honestly, I feel bad because I made the TikTok because of course it's a great headline.
Yeah.
But even making the TikTok, I was like, this just isn't. It is. I will defend myself by saying it is in fact news, right? Yeah. Like it's a cool paper. It's interesting. No, it's
100%.
It identifies something novel, and it matters. It does. When I think about the definition of news, it's like, has this updated the way we should think about some problem?
Yeah.
Or something. Yes,
I agree.
But take the full scope. We're going from like here to here, not here to there.
Yeah.
So okay.
Yeah, I think for me, the way that I really think about this is that the quantum problem, like the quantum cryptography problem, is one of the types of issues that humans are incredibly sensitive to and will respond to, as opposed to something like AI, where it's just can creep up on you. Cryptography breaking is just so obvious. Like everyone's just like, oh, that's bad. Like, can't have that. Whereas AI is like, but it does this thing.
It's hard to even imagine what it might do.
Yeah, exactly.
A little bit. Yeah. Whereas like breaking cryptography is like, it's like, you know that your stuff is, people are like, I want my data in a box.
Exactly.
Secure.
It's like
oh, it won't be secure. Okay, I get it.
Yeah. It's like you like getting hit by a car versus you being like in a pot of water slowly boiling. Like these are very different.
Which is things. So funny. It's so funny because one of the points one of the authors of the paper, I believe, I think it was the Ethereum Foundation guy actually, a point he made about the paper is he was like, what's so funny is we haven't even tried to use AI to find a better optimization to this faster. And I was like, it's amazing to me that you can have people understand this one problem so well, the quantum thing, like, oh, the cryptography is going to break, while they misunderstand the AI threat, even though the AI threat, there's a really same thing. It's a one-to-one. It
just makes this thing worse.
If all you have to do is be like, oh, crazy, like unbelievably powerful AI will at the very least figure out quantum.
Like improve, yeah.
like we're pretty sure about that. It's so funny. Yeah. Okay. I want to move into the last section, which you've already covered a little bit, but I'm maybe going to ask you to do it in a slightly more structured way. Mm-hmm. We're just going to focus on the big three as we talk about them: Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana. Give me kind of like the one or two liners for each. So how big of a threat is this to Bitcoin in particular? Quantum computing, maybe generally, updates to this paper, whatever, however you want to describe it.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to highlight the types of threats that are possible. So there is a real life live threats, which is like you send out a transaction, someone intercepts it, and they do something they shouldn't do in real time. There is a resting threat, which is like you have some wallet that's resting and sitting around, and someone knows a public key, and then they break it using that public key. And then there is the more structural, we have some trusted setup for some cryptographic part of the protocol that can be broken. Yeah. So for Bitcoin, the first two are the bigger issues. Bitcoin's really slow. This 9 minutes attack that they said that you could break Bitcoin in 9 minutes. This 9 minutes attack, Bitcoin's block times are 10 minutes. So if I put out a transaction, they will have enough time to run an full attack and modify my transaction in that 10-minute window, right?
So that's bad.
So that's very bad. There's also the resting issue, which is that there's I think about 67 billion or 6.7 billion Bitcoin kind of just sitting around in these things called scripts, and these scripts the hashes are kind of protected, but the public key for a good amount of them. And because of that, this money's just sitting around. Satoshi's account is just sitting there. Everyone knows the public key. You can just take the money out, basically.
Oh, no,
not Satoshi's money. It's a retirement fund. Good guy.
Yeah.
It's a
good person.
Fund. Yeah. Guy was gender neutral there. I'm sorry. That's my bad. I should have made that clear.
Thank you.
Or group. So those are the two big things for Bitcoin. There is the live attack and the resting attack. For Ethereum, the live attack is less relevant because it has 12-second block times, but this could be made faster. Like you said, there's no lower bound for how fast this could be potentially. So maybe like Ethereum's 12-second block time isn't fast enough. But right now, you should be fine for the most part. There's the resting issue, which is that every publicly available public key can be broken. You can just take the public key, reverse engineer it with a quantum computer, grab the money out of it to pretty much get the private key, grab the money. There's another issue, which is at the protocol level, Ethereum has a bunch of things like trusted setups for its data availability layer. So Ethereum uses this thing called KGZ, commitments, to allow L2s to deposit like information, like to store information. That's how L2s work. Like I don't have to get into the details, but basically there's many layers to Ethereum, many parts that are moving around. And a part of this is like this trusted setup. This is like the core of how it works. There is some key that was created that was thrown away. No one knows what it is. That's why it's a trusted setup. Like I think like 100,000 people were watching it happen, and they're like, okay, the keys are gone. We've all like, we're here to prove it, and like this is good. That key can be reverse engineered, and then every single L2, L3, L whatever on Ethereum
is this part of why Vitalik is all of a sudden like, I don't like L2s?
I think maybe it's a part of it, but I think it's more that
just some other
L2s are just like there's like more
complicated. Yeah. Okay.
So that's kind of the Ethereum situation.
And that's kind of a particular Ethereum vulnerability.
Yeah.
Like this doesn't really apply to Bitcoin or Solana at all. Okay.
I think another thing to think about on Ethereum is that there are EOAs, which are like end accounts, like the random like account, but they're also multi-sig wallets. There's wallets that like govern like a protocol. So protocols are also susceptible as well because they also just are governed by accounts on some layer. Like some of them are. Like Uniswap isn't. But some other protocols have.
So a nice comparison here is like Bitcoin, it's not stuff we do that's at risk.
Yeah.
It's money we hold.
It's just the Bitcoin, yeah.
Ethereum, it's probably a little bit more like stuff we do.
Stuff we do.
At risk. Yeah. Yes, also money we hold, but much more like
stuff we do.
Actually, there's real stuff happening on this thing.
Yeah, you can like manipulate like everything that's happening. Solana, everything's at risk. Why? Because everything's an account on Solana. The way Solana functions, it's like it's one massive file system where everything's an account. Every protocol is an account. Every account that you might hold is an account. Every multi-sig is also an account. Like all these things are accounts, and all these accounts use the same cryptography that can be like broken. And so in some sense, the resting threat is bigger on Solana because everything's an account. But the live threat is smaller because it's 400 millisecond block times, and getting it that fast is probably unlikely, but it's possible. But it's faster. Like it will be harder to attack from a live perspective than Bitcoin and then Ethereum. But from a resting perspective, everything is kind of vulnerable. That said, for Ethereum and Solana, there are plans. One, plans, and two, people are competent enough to like get these things done. I do have questions about post-quantum cryptographic methods are not as fast. They're not slower necessarily, like much slower, but they're not as fast. Like I wonder what that looks like for like something like Solana, like if they're able to figure it out. Another big issue is bandwidth, and I think this is a big issue for Bitcoin. These like post-quantum cryptographic methods, they like are taking up 10 to 100x the space for passing keys around. These keys are much longer. They're much harder to read, which I think is also going to be a UX issue to figure out. But they're like much harder to read, much longer. For that reason, Bitcoin, Ethereum, and even Solana to some extent, they want to like keep the nodes like somewhat performant and like light. You're going to have a lot of overhead from a bandwidth perspective to like pass all these keys around. And so things might get slowed down from that perspective as well. So like these are all things you kind of have to weigh. Do I think these things are going to become post-quantum proof, like post-quantum cryptography proof? Like, yeah.
Probably, yeah.
But I think there might be practical issues around like, is it as fast? Is it as performant? Do nodes all have to get bigger? Like, what does that mean for the protocols? And I think those are going to be the things that are going to be actual bottlenecks to these things being implemented.
Yeah.
People are going to try to come up with some fun, fancy solutions instead of just like doing the simple thing, do it, and then like iterate from there.
So I might of course, break this down into a little bit of like a 2x2 situation. So you have kind of like level of risk to current architecture, low risk, high risk. And then you have like ease for that particular kind of real world, like who runs these things, who's involved, what's the process by which a decision is made, and then things go from decision to execution. hard, easy, right? And maybe I should flip that. Easy, hard. So high risk, hard, low risk, easy, kind of like this. I would describe Bitcoin as very much in the top right. It's high risk, and it's going to be hard to do the transition because the structure of how changes would happen, the structure of the decisions to get there, it's not entirely clear to me. I believe it will happen, right? So even in this, like, it's hard and it's a high risk, I still think Bitcoin is fine. But that's where I'd put it. Do you agree with that?
Yeah.
Ethereum, I think, is probably like, medium to high risk. It's not quite as high risk as Bitcoin. Do you agree with that or disagree?
I think from the perspective of Ethereum, it's just as high risk, actually. I think all three are just as high risk.
Okay, wow. So all three fall in high risk.
Yeah.
For slightly different reasons.
Yeah.
But I'd maybe also, I was going to say kind of like medium high for the transition period.
I'd say medium low.
Medium low.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
I think the Ethereum Foundation, they're really good at cryptography. People the things that people see, that people are like, the Ethereum Foundation, they don't really ship anything. They ship lots of things, but the things they're shipping are like core cryptographic weird feature. It's not like, oh, this makes it really easy for you to have this really cool application built on top, and so it's not obvious what they're shipping.
But what about the node structure for Ethereum?
What do you mean?
Like, the goal is for it to be like you can run this on a
but I think
laptop or something.
I don't think that's going to be. I think this additional overhead will make the nodes slightly bulkier, but I don't think it's going to be so. It's
20% bulkier, but computers will get okay.
It'll be fine on a computer still. Yeah,
totally fair. Okay, Solana, same high risk.
Yeah, high risk.
Also low medium.
Low medium. Yeah.
But for a slightly different reason.
Slightly different reasons.
Ethereum thing.
Yeah, I think Solana they're like already like coming out with like full implementations, and they're moving a bit faster on it. I still think it's low medium though, because the attack surface is just so large.
Interesting.
Everything's an account on Solana.
But that's why it's high risk. But I think the transition period thing is like, I think if you're Solana, you can
kind of just rip it. But I think
they have massive computers running as nodes already.
Yeah.
It's so fast that
I think it's
reduce the speed a little bit, and
I think the bottleneck's going to be, if the bandwidth issue is enough of a problem, Solana's going to be like, we're going to try and spend some time to try and solve this, so we don't have to like change the performance profile of our blockchain. And I think there's a world where they're like, the thing we care most about is speed. We're going to spend some time to try and make it just as fast. That's why I think it's low, medium, and not just low. I think it would be low if they were like, let's just be safe.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's their North Star.
It would be like one night they would change it all. Yeah. Kind of thing.
Yeah.
Tell the nodes they have to update or something.
Quickly. They do it quickly.
That's great. So, okay. So I think this was an awesome episode. I'm kind of surprised how, in some sense, like, we never talk about quantum stuff ever. This is the first time, second time, I guess, when the day the article came out. I feel like we both have a remarkable quantity of takes about quantum. Very funny.
Yeah.
That's how life works. So good stuff. Yeah, I think we basically covered, like, look, this is a problem for everything in a sense. It's not an immediate threat. It's a, make sure you make changes over the next 5 years kind of threat. And honestly, the signals are really positive on like people moving that direction. Finally, we covered that, like, this is a pretty high risk for the current structures. They're all at risk for Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana. However, even for the highest risk one, the one that is going to be hardest to transition from, Bitcoin, we still see the path. For the other two, it's like they're gonna transition. Yeah. This is just not like this is not existential for these things, in the sense that they're gonna figure it out. Good stuff. I'm excited for the next Google Quantum paper to drop. We'll run it back.
Yeah, something else to skim and not read.
Yeah. I can't believe you didn't read it. That's messed up. I didn't either, but of course I didn't read it.
57 pages.
All right, yeah. Thanks for joining us on this episode. Hope you enjoyed, and we'll be back soon with the next episode.
Thank you.